Hey, welcome to BreitWerks. What are you looking at? 1971 911 T engine that we're putting back together. And we are ready to put some pistons and cylinders in here. I've got them out and prepped, 5 of them at least. And I've already loaded the rings, pistons, and I've got one of the circlips in. So we'll be able to go in from this side. But the first thing we got to do is we have to measure our base gaskets, figure out how much base gasket do we actually need. So I'm gonna, without doing all of the sealant and stuff that you'll see us do a little bit later, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna install one of those pistons and I'm going to measure our piston height. So we're gonna see what that ends up at. We're gonna start out with a 1 millimeter base gasket and go from there. All right, so most of my adult life, I have measured deck height something along the lines of this. So here we're at 0.068, or I'm sorry, 0.68. And then if we go and we do that on the other side of the piston, we should also be at 0.55. So if we average those two, we're at about 0.6 millimeters, right? 0.6 millimeters. Yeah, this is never the easiest, but yeah, 0.55. So they're repeatable. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna use the solder and see what happens with the solder. And we've got 3 millimeter solder. So we've made one edge very flat, and we're going to actually probably use a little tape to hold those down. All right, we're gonna measure what that ends up being. All right, so here's the setup. We've got these 2 pieces of solder, and I double checked that this solder will squeeze down to less than 1 millimeter. So we've got 1 millimeter shim in there, and now what we're gonna do, I've got this other cylinder over here, basically just to support it. We're gonna pop the head on, the cam rack head assembly on, and then we're just gonna torque down these 4 bolts and then roll this guy past TDC. And then we'll measure these. So that's the setup and that's the plan. All right, head's on, torque to 22 foot-pounds. So we got our Z1 mark here. So, okay, that's it. Now we'll take it all apart. All right, so we got the head back off, and it looks like we do have a little compression. So we're gonna measure that. All right, so we have finished up our measurements. So we knew we had 0.6 with the old vernier caliper method. However, we're at 1.88, 1.83. So if we average those two, we're at about 1.85. So we did the base gasket guess, the initial guess, simply based on math, right? How much was cut here, there, and everywhere. But the cool part is, what we really can do here is to fine tune this. Would this run? Yeah, it would run, be fine. But we can fine tune this, that if we take this measurement down to 1.5 millimeters, some guys will say 1, but this is a whole new way of looking at the world. But you can look up flame propagation for yourself. 1.5 millimeters will be perfect right here. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna go from a 1 millimeter shim, and we're gonna stack a 50 and a 25. And that'll get us right in the absolute sweet spot of where Porsche was originally putting these motors. So I have learned something new through this process. Long debate with somebody who's been doing this since before I could spell torque wrench. So would this run? Absolutely. The math gets you within what, 0.25 of a millimeter, maybe half a millimeter. But we're actually going to fine tune this one, go a little bit further. And on this one, you know, you had a lot of things cut, so a lot of differences. Most times, 9 times out of 10, you can go back with just stock base gaskets and not worry about it, but not when you're dealing with these old mag cases. So we're gonna get this motor so it runs absolutely as good as possible for a very, very long time. So the only problem with that is it delays us because we've got 0.25s in stock and we need to get 0.5s sent to us so that we can put those together and get our 0.75. They don't make a 0.75 shim. Anyway, we're gonna close this out until we get those shims, and then we'll talk about piston installs. But yeah, this is gonna be fantastic. So those two little pieces of solder thing absolutely work. Have a fantastic day. If you like these kind of videos, check us out at BreitWerks.com.